Recent riots in Minneapolis, more than 20% of police officers there have started the process to apply for permanent disability, with most cases related to PTSD. And we're hearing similar stories in cities across the country. Mike Tobin has more on this troubling trend. He's live for us in Chicago. Mike.
And Tracer, should I update you with the fact that the Charter Commission in Minneapolis took a vote last night that will keep disbanding the police off the November ballot and therefore block the city council's efforts to get rid of the police force. But getting rid of the police, especially in Minneapolis, is happening anyway. With a significant segment of the population and the city leadership turned against them, cops are leaving the job, and a lot of them don't have a choice. A lawyer representing police officers in Minneapolis says following the George Floyd riots and surrender of the 3rd Precinct, as you mentioned, upwards of 200 of the 860 cops on the force have started the process of applying for permanent disability, and most of the cases are for post-traumatic stress disorder. Their lawyer says this is not a case in which they've had enough or they're choosing disability to walk off the job. They need to be diagnosed by 2 psychologists before they even start the application.
Many of my officers have served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they've said that what they experienced following the George Floyd killing was far greater, far worse, far more intense.
Now, in Chicago, more than a dozen police officers have committed suicide since 2017. The most recent case was at the end of July. A deputy chief shot himself in the chest. The head of the police union in Chicago says cops are seeking early retirement with such haste. Some are not waiting until they qualify for medical benefits in early retirement. Los Angeles could not supply numbers specific to the police force, but a lawyer representing first responders says early retirement is spiking. The city says early retirement for all public employees was up 50% in June. In Seattle, the head of the Police Officers Guild says that he fears a day when there will not be enough officers to answer the call. Trace?
Mike Tobin live for us in Chicago. Mike, thank you.
Black World TV, black by popular demand. So family, you just saw the video, and I'm not feeling for these cops, not one bit. If you've heard correctly, yes, upwards of about 200 Minneapolis police officers, and then also there's other stories like this across the country, as they reported, that they're filing for permanent disability. Boo-hoo-hoo. You made the bed that you now lie in. This whole fiasco with the Black Lives Matter movements, the protests across the world, because it's not just here in the United Snakes of America. This is across the world, where there are protests against racism, against white supremacy. People are tired and fed up of it. And unfortunately, the police have been the face of racism, especially when it comes to oppressing the black original human beings of the earth. So, I don't feel bad for these Minneapolis cops or any of the other ones across America that are now filing for permanent disability. I find that a farce. It's a travesty that our country would allow these men, because after all, the majority of them happen to be white. Isn't that a coincidence that they're all doing the same type of thing where they're trying to get over on the system? This is the type of men and women that we now have in blue, brandishing and wearing the badge. You know, the men in blue, protect the blue. You know, that you white supremacists have been supporting your whole pathetic life. Now you're seeing it fall right before your eyes. And what did he report? He said that the city has turned against them. You think? After seeing a man lying down on the ground begging for his life under the knee of a white racist disguised as a cop, with his knee on this black man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, I'd say that the people around the country have had enough of your shenanigans. They've had enough of your oppression. They've had enough of your police brutality. And so I find these cases of PTSD, I find it utter BS. Utter BS. And while I'm on this subject, he tried to compare the police officers towards our men and women in the armed services, and how our police officers on the streets after the George Floyd protesters have been going on, that they feel even more stressed on our streets than they ever did out in the battlefields of war. Can you believe that kind of charge? Oh, that was by their lawyer. You know, that con artist that was sitting up there behind the microphone. And he is defending these type of police officers. He cited how there's many cases of police officers who are committing suicide. Well, karma is a bitch. Again, this is not something I feel bad for any of them. They're probably committing suicide based on A, their training, which they know is faulty and totally against God's laws. I feel bad for any police officer who has any type of religious affiliations, because if you have to go home every day knowing that you carried out your job disrespecting, being mean-spirited, and oppressing people based on some of the most simplest things, such as skin color, then I know you can't sleep well at night. You can't possibly sleep well at night. So I'm not surprised of the suicides that are happening with any of these police officers, including the police chief you just mentioned that happened here recently, where he shot himself in the chest. I'm not surprised. There's probably more to come. When these investigations carry on and people come to find out what kind of dirt, what kind of filth is behind many of your actions, well, you're going to find a lot of people highly stressed out. But to call it PTSD, that's straight up BS. Side note, I had some ex-friends where I was staying with them for a while. I was during a bad time. I needed help. The friend's husband, he used to be in the armed services. He learned how can I say, get over on the system, because as he admitted to me, he taught all the other guys in his barrack, in his platoon, if you will, whatever you call them, he taught them all how to fill out the paperwork and how they can get over on the government too and get assistance each and every month, just like he did. And I have to tell you, he was living high on the hog. He was an able-bodied person. There was nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with this guy. He went on to go to college because he was able to afford it. Even afforded it for his wife. Paid for her college tuition and everything. And all I can tell you is they were getting so many benefits, it's not even funny. It was a travesty, actually, what I had to witness in front of my eyes, knowing how many black people, especially some of the black vets out there, you weren't getting these type of benefits I was seeing he was getting. But back to the story. They mentioned early retirement up 50%. Wow. Last but not least, don't fear that there won't be any cops to call. The cops, having no one to call, will be able to police ourselves. That's what our